Belfort and Lupin, or Lupin, is the newest in children's animal entertainment that has rapidly taken parts of the internet by storm. It's made by a French studio called Ellipse Animation and partners with the Castle of Versailles, yes, just like the castle itself, to tell the history of the castle and specifically the life of King Louis XIV. The main selling point of this series, however, is of course the animal characters. The creator of the series tells the story of how he was fascinated by the surprising amount of wildlife that lived in the castle during this time period. From dogs in the castle, animals in the menagerie, castle pests, and wild animals. And obviously, this is the basis for all of our characters in the show as well. But I think the real selling point is the classic tale of friendship between two characters that come from different worlds. I've talked at length at how much I love this type of story. In fact, several of the movies I've talked about could be considered to be this. And you know what? It got to me too. If you have cute animal characters and an unlikely friendship story, I'll be there. But in the midst of all these positive acclamations, one question arises. Is the show actually any good? Well, that's what I claim to answer today, in my own opinion at least. So let's begin. One of the primary points of appeal for many people first laying eyes on this series is, of course, the art style and animation. I immediately fell in love with the way this series looks. It uses 3D models, but with 2D style rendering and backgrounds. And from what I can gather, it took a lot of people, a lot of hard, dedicated, and long work to craft every aspect of the world and characters until it looked the way it does. From the beautiful backgrounds that really capture the majesty of Versailles, to the painter-esque look of brushstrokes on each of the characters, to the character animation that matches each character's personality, and even some instances of very dynamic camera work during vibrant action sequences, all of it makes the whole show look absolutely gorgeous. And it's honestly so cool what you can do when combining 3D and 2D styles to create artistic and expressive pieces such as this. I would genuinely watch an entire theatrical film with this art style and animation. Like, for an animated cartoon series, I feel like you don't see animation to this caliber very often, which is to be expected due to the generally lower budget. But man, either the budget or the time or just the plain talent that these artists and animators must have been a lot in order to create something that looks this good. So yeah, obviously I love the animation, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, so I don't need to keep raving about it, even though I could. But what about the rest of the show? Does it hold up to the immense expectations that the animation sets for itself? Well, we'll see. Before we get into the show's actual writing and storylines, let's briefly talk about the educational aspect of this show. At the end of each episode, there's actually a little short history lesson about a certain topic that was shown in the episode. These are pretty simple overviews of small but interesting facts about either the palace itself or the people and animals that lived there in the 1600s. Examples include the history of the palace's fountains, gardens, and animal enclosures, as well as the activities that the people who live there like to partake in, such as tabletop games, dances, music, scientific endeavors, and a whole bunch of other things. Now, I haven't officially fact-checked any of these lessons, but considering the fact that the actual Chateau de Versailles is endorsing this series, I'm just gonna trust for now that they know what they're talking about. Anyway, I do think it's an interesting and engaging way of teaching French history to children, especially with all the little animations and inclusion of real-life portraits. The only criticism I could think of, and not to be too pessimistic, but maybe it is a little bit too idolizing of this time period and the monarchy. I don't claim to know all that much about this subject, so please excuse my thinking out loud, but just in a general sense, this show is inevitably a bit biased due to its affiliation with the actual castle, and also due to just wanting a nice, pleasant story setting in a place that is meant to evoke positive awe and wonder. And so it sometimes seems like this positive bias is sometimes showcased in the show itself. In particular, when we see the contrast between the unnecessarily extravagant lifestyles of the people, and animals, in Versailles, compared to the relative misfortunes of wild animals like Lupin himself.
Tout ce banquet juste pour nous quatre? Vraiment? Quand il y a des animaux juste en dehors du château qui peinent à trouver de quoi se nourrir.
To be fair, the wild animals don't really complain about it. They like their own wild lifestyles. But it is a plot point that is brought up now and again, but never really touched upon further, which I think is a bit weird, to say the least. Also, the king himself is a character in this show. Yet he feels more like a divine being that can do no wrong and will always have the right solution. Which I feel like is just a little bit, how do you say, bad? No human is free of flaws, and I think it's important to highlight that. Sure, it's okay for a story to have a character who acts mostly noble all the time, for narrative simplicity's sake, but when that character is also representative of a real-life king who commanded respect, and evidently believed in divine absolute monarchy, it does feel a bit propaganda-y. Even though, he's not even alive anymore, and the French monarchy has long been disbanded. Speaking of which, make sure not to confuse King Louis XIV with King Louis XVI. The former is XIV, while the latter is XVI. If Belfort and Lupin was about Louis XVI, let's just say the show would have a much different ending to it. Anyway, let's move on. I am by no means a music expert in any way, but I feel like I just have to give recognition where it's due to the soundtrack of this series. Each ambient track really gives the feel of classical music and a grandiose environment that I think really does fit the vibe of the show. The main theme song is also very great, exuding a feeling of both passion and fun, but also just comfort and bliss, like a Saturday morning cartoon that evokes much carefree nostalgia. I also think it's interesting how there's times where the main theme is used in other parts of an episode, but with different moods, like a more adventurous remix during action scenes, or a softer, slower version during emotional moments. I feel like it's pretty standard practice, but nevertheless, I wanted to bring it up because I feel like the show does a really good job with the music, and these tracks do get stuck in my head. Overall, a beautiful soundtrack, and there's not much more I can say about it without just outright playing it. Okay, I'm done with this little detour. Let's move on. Let's finally talk about some characters, shall we? We first of all have, of course, our titular Belfort and Lupin. Belfort is a spaniel who is one of King Louis XIV's palace dogs, and pretty much just his favorite dog. He's characterized by his exceedingly proper and gentlemanly etiquette and conduct. He always addresses everyone cordially and likes to uphold the lifestyle of Versailles. Sometimes to the point where he becomes overly dramatic or unreasonable, not necessarily in an out-of-character way, but rather in a way that shows how much growing up in this environment has definitely impacted his personality, although certainly not as much as the rest of his family. And yet, despite his aforementioned proper demeanor, he can still certainly let loose and have fun. Besides that, Belfort is naturally loyal, for obvious reasons, and has a commitment to both his friends and his family, which sometimes causes issues when those two sides are not aligned, but nevertheless, he will always make an effort to defend those he cares about. He's also been shown on occasion to have insecurities regarding his own self-worth, and particularly his place in such a high-end palace such as Versailles, which makes for some interesting episode conflicts. Ultimately a well-rounded character who manages to still be written consistently for the most part. On the flip side, we have Lupin, or Lupin, a wolf who lives in the wilderness surrounding Versailles. He is characterized by his much more casual and colloquial manner of speaking and acting. He's also a little less morally conscious and more mischievous than Belfort. But in reality, I actually think he's also kind of a sweetheart. There's many instances of him actively helping out Belfort and the other animals, sometimes due to Belfort's insistence, but also sometimes due to his own volition. He's also just kind of silly. He also always slips on the castle floors. It's a bit of a running gag. This is just a general overview of the characters of Belfort and Lupin. I will touch on a lot more later, but first I want to give you an overview of everyone else first for context. Agyeman is a Siamese cat, the pet of one of the members of the castle. She is the brains of the group, always showing up to aid Belfort and Lupin with whatever they've gotten themselves into, with some convenient knowledge about whatever situation they're facing. She's pretty prideful and cheeky, as she likes to make fun of the boys, particularly Lupin, and they have a pretty funny and consistent rivalry throughout the series. A character like this could easily become annoying, but she isn't overused. In fact, she's kinda underused considering how prominently she's displayed in the marketing. Plus, she has a natural charm and charisma that will surely make her a fan favorite, no doubt. Next up is Agyeman's best friend, Gazette, a rat who lives in the Queen's wig and, ironically, despite being a rat, is definitely the most well-dressed and fancy of all of them. Now that I think about it, in a show that's relatively grounded in reality, in terms of the animals of Versailles actually acting like animals and not being too anthropomorphized, it is a little weird that Gazette is the only one that actually wears clothes. Like, where did she get tiny mouse clothes from? Did she make them herself? If so, good for her. That must have not been easy to get all the supplies and then stitch it all together. Anyway, she's another brains figure, but more so in terms of book smarts, rather than Agyeman's wit and cleverness. and in turn, she's definitely more polite than her best friend. But her and Ariane still get along well. I don't have too much more to say about her. She's not bad by any means, just not too interesting yet. But then again, I also feel like she's a bit underutilized. Before we leave the castle, let's talk about Diane, Belfort's mother, and Tan and Pawn, his two sisters. Diane is a distinguished royal dog at heart, meaning she subscribes to a very rigorous etiquette code, much more than even Belfort does. Tan and Pawn seemingly want to impress their mother, although they are often more concerned with messing with Belfort and pointing out his royal shortcomings, making them definitely a lot less polite and proper than Diane. Tan and Pawn are also often the source of conflict, as their cockiness often leads them to trouble. I'm gonna be honest, I really don't like these two. And yeah, I know I'm supposed to think they're annoying, but honestly, what I really don't like about them is that I can't tell which is which. And that's just bad characterization. There's literally nothing to distinguish them. They just both hate Belfort for the sake of it, and make it their life goal to harass him, which is not only a shallow character foundation, but 2 shallow character foundations. Belfort should really have only had one sister, or better yet, no sisters, and just one mother who disapproves of the parts of him that are uncouth, but is still able to show more nuance than these two. But yeah, I actually think Diane's relationship with her son is very interesting. She obviously cares for him, but this care is shown in the form of wanting him to succeed in the way she sees fit, not necessarily what Belfort wants. And I feel like the show does a great job of showing how Belfort is like a fusion between the Versailles etiquette and the more wild side of animals. By contrasting Belfort with Lupin, we see how he's relatively more concerned for upholding all things gentlemanly, but by contrasting him with Diane, we see how he still doesn't measure up to everything expected of him, nor does he always want to either, which adds some great internal and external conflict. Also, Diane is not supportive of his friendship with Lupin, attributing the wolf to a vagabond. Yet, she doesn't really stop Belfort from hanging out with him, so I guess that's good for them. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, or more accurately, the menagerie. That was a horrible transition. Madame Rosa is an elephant that lives in the Versailles animal enclosures. She was originally from Portugal, a fact that she won't let you forget.
Jamais on n'aurait vu une chose pareille à la cour du Portugal. Jamais. Jamais on ne m'aurait demandé une chose pareille du temps où je vivais au Portugal. Mon très cher Portugal. Oh, le Portugal. À la cour du roi du Portugal, jamais on ne m'aurait demandé une chose pareille. Jamais. Rien à voir avec les cacahuètes qu'on me servait quand je vivais au Portugal. Jamais on ne m'aurait demandé une chose pareille du temps où je vivais au Portugal. À la cour du Portugal, les humains l'utilisent pour fabriquer du chocolat. Belfort, permettez-moi de vous présenter mon très cher ami de la cour du Portugal. Oh, cela me fait regretter la douceur du climat du Portugal. Je serai la risée complète de mes amis de Versailles et aussi de ceux du Portugal.
She's another character committed to upholding Versailles etiquette, and, like Diane, treats outside animals as less than. Despite her reluctance to help at first, she actually often is the one to help resolve conflicts in many episodes, after a bit of persuasion, due to her large size and abilities being useful for many applications. There are also many other animals in the menagerie, but they're not as relevant aside from an episode or two. The second most important characters, I would say, are Madame du Bouc and Madame du Bec, who are 2 ostriches who are essentially Madame Rosa's wingmen. Get it? Always hyping her up and agreeing with everything she says, but are generally just kinda dumb. Let's finally talk about some humans. King Louis XIV. He was a real guy. Like I said before, the show likes to showcase him as being just so elegant and noble, which I don't know if he was or not. I don't know him personally, but it does get kinda old after a while. Am I just being anti? Like, is this valid or no? I mean, I would just like to get more actual character besides just being perfect. But I guess we don't want the citizens of this show to be upset with the king and start a revolution or anything, so... Bazir! He's the humans the dog interact with the most, being the royal dog taker and all. Episodes with him often revolve around him searching for Belfort, who always goes running off with Lupin. Now this definitely gets old after a while, and it doesn't help that he's always the butt of slapstick jokes. Honestly, I don't know whether to feel annoyed by him or bad for him. There are way more animals and humans I could talk about, but for the sake of this video not being too long, I'll spare you. For now, let's just get into the actual backbone of the episode's plots, the writing. The general idea behind each episode's plot is that Belfort and Lupin find an animal in trouble, and they have to solve their problem. Whether it be a personal problem, from an animal from the castle grounds, or from a wild animal. The show does do a good job of keeping your engagement throughout the entire episode by creating new developments in the conflict that the pair must navigate, some of which result in very satisfying action sequences. It ultimately helps keep the 20-minute episodes engaging and not too drawn out. However, I personally believe one of the main problems with the episode's plots is the way in which the conflicts are resolved. There are several instances where the solution was something unbelievably simple, like when it's just to confess to a wrongdoing, or when it's just Belfort needing to convince the king to do or not do something, which is pretty easy considering Belfort is his favorite dog, and he abides by whatever he wants, which happens a bit too often if I'm gonna be honest. Now that I think about it, Belfort basically has control over all of the French kingdom. He can just manipulate the king to do whatever he wants. But I digress. Sometimes it feels like the two main characters didn't even have to do anything. The issue just resolves itself. And so it kind of nullifies the whole purpose of everything we just saw on screen. I just think with a stronger resolution that actually feels more satisfying, and possibly wraps everything back together in a clever way, it would make the whole episode's plot feel much better. I think the root of the issue is the fact that this show is, wouldn't you know it, meant for children. That's totally fine, but that won't stop me from highlighting the ways in which it is superficial, please and thank you. Additionally, sometimes the stakes just feel a bit too underwhelming. Or I guess rather, there would be real stakes, except since this show is for children, they have to sugarcoat it a little bit and or add more lighthearted stakes. Like, the issue is never that an animal could get hurt or even die. If there is an issue, they either tiptoe around the potential consequences, or simply it is a matter of dishonor or being forced to quote-unquote leave Versailles.
Et vu son âge, on devra l'envoyer au pré.
Oh.
Le pré signifie surtout que je ne mérite plus ma place aux écuries royales.
Like, come on, just let the animals fear for their lives a little bit. Ain't no harm in thinking you're gonna die just for a 20-minute episode, right? A prime example is when Belfort's family accidentally ate chocolate, which is toxic for dogs, and yet the motivation to help them is spelled out to be the fact that the king would replace them if they are unable to go on the royal hunt. Which he would never do, by the way, given the fact that the king's character is always so reasonable and understanding. But also, it conveniently overlooks the fact that the more pressing matter is that his family could possibly be dying. Okay, so I'm not opposed to the series being more lighthearted, but I do think the writing could stand to make the stakes more intuitive, as opposed to having to spell out exactly how a problem will affect a character. Especially when the much darker conclusion is just staring you right in the face. It just seems a bit too obvious when the show is trying to steer you in a different, more positive direction. As for the jokes, there are quite a few lines and moments that I did find genuinely funny, but overall I was more neutral on the more childlike and simple humor. However, I think where the show's writing really shines are the shows that are based on the characters and their dynamics. Perhaps less funny and more charming, but nevertheless I enjoyed these moments. Whether it be Ariane's always convenient knowledge of the situation that she lords over the two protagonists, to her and Lupin's subtle yet ever-present rivalry, to Lupin just being fed up with every single stuck-up animal they meet, requiring Belfort to have to be a mediator, that is unless he himself is also sick of it. I just think the character-based humor impresses me a lot more than when the show actually tries to make jokes. As for the slapstick aspect, I don't particularly care for it. Although I must admit, if you're not constantly trying to view everything from an overly critical lens, which is what I'm doing with these videos, it can be kinda silly and charming. And I mean, it does make sense that Lupin wouldn't know how to walk on the slippery castle floors, as he's used to the rough terrain of the wild. And hey, I'm just glad that it's not his entire character. So the episode's plots and jokes may not be the best thing ever, but it gets the job done. What really makes up for it, however, is the part of the series that I believe the majority of people probably focused on. That is, of course, Belfort and Lupin's relationship. This show is filled to the brim with uplifting moments, sadder moments, silly moments, and fun moments, all between our two protagonists. Even though not every episode is specifically about their friendship is still baked into the foundation of this series. It's ever present, and, if not explicit, then it's subliminally always an underlying theme. And I think that's why it's such an integral part of the show as a whole. What makes it especially great is that it's a wholesome, healthy depiction of a friendship or relationship without feeling too reliant on contrived conflict or feeling superficial or cliche. And so let's divulge into how the show cleverly characterizes and develops Belfort and Lupin's dynamic in a consistent and satisfying way. One of the ways the series manages to give nuance to each protagonist's personalities is by contrasting them with the other characters in the show. Belfort is an interesting mix between a follower of Versailles customs / his family's expectations, and a considerate, down-to-earth fellow who is sometimes willing to get his hands dirty in an effort to help others, even those seem as less elite. When Belfort is with his family, he is often the one to question the superfluousness of their lifestyle in contrast to the relative disadvantages that wild animals face. However, when Belfort is with Lupin, he often is the superfluous one himself, being melodramatic, defensive of Versailles customs, and unwilling to stoop to undignified methods, at least in contrast to Lupin, who cares much less about his reputation and, being a wild wolf after all, has grown used to using whatever means necessary to survive. As a result, I believe the show does a great job of showing nuance in Belfort's character. He's not totally snobby, nor is he completely undignified. He's a unique blend of both high class, yet down to earth. Meanwhile, Lupin has shown in multiple instances that he really is happiest when Belfort is around. First of all, Belfort is often the first person that he goes to talk to every day, or the first person he goes to when there's some issue that he needs help with. And the same can be said for Belfort, in fact even more so. Even when a problem is personal, castle-based stuff, he almost always immediately asks Lupin for his assistance. Which, to be fair, makes sense because Lupin is the one who often has the wild smarts and a good tracking nose, which are both very useful when dealing with an external threat of some sort. But nevertheless, the fact that Belfort trusts Lupin more than anyone really, is really something special. I mean, when his mother asks him to keep her fleas a secret because she didn't want them to seem uncouth, Belfort promises to keep it, and then immediately tells Lupin. Which, first of all, kind of a jerk move, but then Belfort refuses to tell anyone else. Not his sisters, not Agyeman, and then it's Lupin who pretends to have the fleas in order to keep other animals away. Which both shows the way Belfort specifically trusts Lupin, and also just how far Lupin would go to help him. And for Lupin, the thought of Belfort leaving Versailles, even for a temporary period, puts Lupin in a very reminiscent mood, longing for when his friend will return, and not even feeling up to hanging out with his other friends. This does pose a bit of an issue for Lupin's character, I will admit. It does seem like he is a bit jealous and possessive over Belfort sometimes, especially in a particular episode where Belfort makes a friend with a cool new Black Panther, and Lupin is convinced Belfort is trying to replace him. What's even worse is that the episode doesn't necessarily end with Lupin learning that it's okay for his best friend to have other good friends. It feels like the show wants you to think that Belfort is the one who should be apologizing. The situation is a bit more nuanced than that, but my point still stands. This doesn't completely make me dislike Lupin though, especially since I can at least understand why he would be so insecure regarding his friendship with Belfort, since he never knew his own family and is often treated as a vagrant and a vermin when on the palace grounds. That's bound to impact his perception of his self-worth and make him want to cling on to whatever friendship he has. And yet, despite all of that, Lupin is still mostly chill about his reputation, and sometimes even has fun with it. But when it's the possibility of Belfort leaving him, that's when he starts feeling the worst. And I think that contrast is very telling about just how important their relationship is to Lupin. Lupin does care about helping other animals too, mostly those that aren't snobby or annoying, but he'll help those ones too, albeit begrudgingly. But it is clear to see that he is most concerned with making Belfort happy, and Belfort is always quick to thank him and will always defend the kindness and ability of his friend to anyone.
Belfort se loue aux mauvaises manières n'est pas invité.
Enfin, mère, Lupin est mon ami. Toutes les trois, vous avez formé une merveilleuse équipe avec Lupin. Il est formidable, n'est-ce pas?
Another aspect of their relationship I think the show depicts very well is the way the pair influences each other. Belfort, who should be a symbol of all things proper and etiquette, is visibly much more casual and even rule-breaking ever since he met Lupin. It's interesting because one episode, Belfort's all upset with Lupin for even suggesting cheating during a dog tracking competition with his sisters, even though his own nose doesn't even work, to then easily giving in to Lupin asking him to destroy his master's ice stash so that they can get this young marmot back to her home in the mountains, to Belfort being completely complacent in making an entire pool table disappear so that Agyeman won't get accused of scratching it, to fully conspiring to sabotage the royal artist's artwork so that the lion in the menagerie won't be famous anymore and that Madame Rosa would become the top influencer. This one was a weird episode, by the way. But yeah, it paints a fascinating picture about how much more openly defiant Belfort becomes ever since meeting Lupin, particularly doing whatever is necessary to help his friends or any animal that needs his help.
quand je pense que cette idée de sabotage venait de moi. Parfois, mon cher Lupin, je me dis que tu as une très mauvaise influence sur moi.
Y'a pas de quoi.
Admittedly, this does pose a bit of a problem, because it makes it seem like Lupin is just the epitome of bad behavior, but considering that most of the things they do either don't pan out, or are at most just a mild inconvenience for the shipshape etiquette of Versailles, it's not that big of a deal. Lupin, on the other hand, is a symbol of all things rambunctious and wild. The show presents us with many situations where we see just how confused and annoyed he is with the arbitrary rules and conduct of Versailles. Lupin's perpetual disdain for the slippery palace floors in almost every single episode is a prime example. And yet, despite this, he still always helps Belfort out with these trivial problems because he knows how much these things mean to him, such as the aforementioned trying to help him win a tracking competition to maintain the honor of his family and his master, or when he helps fix him up to pose for a family portrait. The series does not stray away from having both characters learn from each other, and I feel like it handles the nuances very well. It really feels like the show is about a dynamic, growing relationship, even in spite of the episodic, non-sequential nature. It's not like either Belfort or Lupin is always the one on the right. They are shown to have differing perspectives and sometimes have disagreements about morality, but in the end they always come together stronger than before. Belfort, despite being a royal dog, learns to show concern and consideration for the needs and rights of the common people and animals, and his kindness grows to beyond those just with rank. Meanwhile, Lupin grows to be less cynical and understands that certain cultures and traditions do matter to people. They shouldn't get in the way of basic morality, but one shouldn't completely disregard them either. So this cartoon contrasts its characters well in a way that shows their nuances and conveys a message about morality and respecting different ideas. But, most likely, what really gets people hyped about their friendship is when it gets, more than that. I mean, just look how cute they are together. First of all, there's the whole "my dear Lupin" expression that Belfort constantly uses with his friend, and Lupin uses it at least once,
Mon cher Belfort.
which may just be in a teasing way, but I like to think that it's a habit he picked up from Belfort. Additionally, the show doesn't shy away from having just a bunch of wholesome depictions of them playing, or just generally being silly. There's also a ton of teasing.
Allez, on y va. Augustin Prosper de Belfort. Ton nom, c'est vraiment ça?
Sans commentaire.
Prosper père.
On a peur des chats, mon cher Lupin?
Augustin Prosper de Belfort, j'ai trouvé.
Ne m'appelle pas comme ça. Mon cher Lupin, je crois que tu as inventé une nouvelle danse.
Attention, tête sur le côté, on cherche la direction du vent et puis on tire la langue. C'était une blague, le...
Ah oui, très drôle. Une fois pour toutes, les vilains monstres, ça n'existe que dans les cauchemars.
Mais pas surtout Augustin Prosper de Belfort.
Ah, parfois tu es insupportable.
Ouais, c'est pour ça que tu m'aimes.
And any drama they have is never unnecessary or friendship ending. It's clear that they mean a lot to each other and will always try to make things work, even on the rare occasions where they're not completely on the same page. It's also very telling how they always infiltrate each other's personal space, as if it's perfectly okay and normal and the other one doesn't mind at all. They are shown to be perfectly comfortable with each other without even having to say it. Honestly, the number of glances, touches, hugs, and otherwise are not only adorable, but is an honestly refreshing depiction of two characters, in a cartoon no less, being able to be wholesomely intimate in a genuine, non-awkward way. Not to say that there isn't ever any awkwardness, but it feels more like a stereotypical rom-com sort of way more than anything.
Belfort, je savais que t'arriverais à t'échapper.
Et moi, j'étais certain que tu n'abandonnerais pas.
Ouais, mon pote, tu sais que tu pourras toujours compter sur moi. Tiens, regarde ce que j'ai trouvé.
There's also this interesting slip Belfort makes when he's away from Lupin.
Excellente idée, mon cher Lupin. Pardon, Madame Rosa.
I could continue with more instances, and I will. They go on an ice cream date, they watch the sunset with their pseudo-adopted child, they constantly remind each other of how great of a team they are, and that they will be friends forever.
Bien sûr, toi, tu resteras toujours mon meilleur ami.
Pour la vie?
Je te le promets, Lupin.
Moi aussi, Belfort. C'est promis.
They are so in sync that they have whole routines in place for their schemes. They both play to their talents and are proud of each other's abilities. So much so that the characters around them, such as Agyeman, really start to take notice.
Belfort et toi, vous êtes plus que des amis.
Si nous rendons les parquets encore plus glissants avec de la cire,
On pourra faire glisser le billard sur le parquet.
Tu as vu comme ils finissent les phrases l'un de l'autre, c'est tellement mignon.
And the concern they have for each other's safety? Whenever Belfort specifically is in danger, Lupin fiercely rushes to help him, much more passionately than any other animal they help, mind you.
Belfort, je déteste faire ça et tu le sais. Ok, j'y vais. Concentration. Bouh.
Ah! Au secours! Au loup!
T'entends ça? C'est la voix de Belfort.
Au secours!
Je vais te sortir de là, Belfort.
Same goes for Belfort always being quick to show concern for Lupin, even when Lupin himself is being silly and reckless.
Vous avez vu ça? Ça décoiffe? Je te signale que tu aurais pu te faire très mal!
Finally, possibly the most telling, Belfort completely weeps when he thinks Lupin has permanently been exiled from Versailles, only for Lupin to return and confirm that he could never leave him.
C'est ne plus jamais te revoir.
Vivre avec une meute de loups, ça doit être au poil, c'est sûr. Mais ma maison, c'est ici, à Versailles. Avec toi.
Oh my gosh, guys, I'm not over-exaggerating just how adorably wholesome this relationship is. Oh yeah, and Lupin tells Belfort he loves him.
Je serai jamais celui que ma famille voudrait que je sois.
Mais t'as une qualité que les autres dans ta famille auront jamais. Tu as du cœur. C'est pour ça que Louis, ton maître, t'aime tant, et c'est pour ça que moi aussi je t'aime.
Can you believe that there are probably some more moments that I'm forgetting about? So yeah, the romantic implications are certainly present. However, despite all of that, the showrunners have said that romance between them is not the intention, but rather an intimate, beyond friendship dynamic. But that other interpretations are okay. Nevertheless, even if it is just best friendship, well, I mean, I strongly believe friendship with your romantic partner is a necessary part of a long-lasting relationship, so I still think it's important to showcase a dynamic like this in media, no matter what the literal label is. And hey, that won't stop the internet, that's for sure. Whether you want representation of an affectionate, non-toxic male friendship, or a wholesome relationship, both are equally important to depict to me, and something you get in spades with this series. I just want to see more of this amazingly compatible, charismatic, bantering, silly, fun, uplifting, intimate, and all-around loving dynamic duo. Yeah, I love this show. I love the characters, the animation is gorgeous, the music is amazing, the history lessons are interesting, and even the writing, while not always the best, does sometimes offer some emotional moments and rich character development, as well as sometimes just the most wacky and ridiculous moments. This is truly something special. I hope for many more seasons in the years to come. I really want this show to see the light of day. But even if it doesn't, I'm glad with what we got. And I thank everyone involved for their genuine dedication to creating such an amazing animated series such as this. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this series too, or at least my video about it. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day. See you later!